Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Sunday, August 28th, 2022. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online website presence. And it'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. And all you do is point on this map and you can get the forecast, including watches, warnings, advisories for anywhere in the country. It's a great way to check up on what the weather is like, where family and friends live. Looking at the map this Sunday afternoon, we have a couple of severe thunderstorm watches, one up there in northern Minnesota, another southeast Wisconsin into northeast Illinois, including Milwaukee and Chicago areas. And then further west, the pink areas represent red flag warnings, parts of southeast Wyoming, as far western Nebraska, and south central Idaho. And then there's a broad area of kind of a brick red color there, southeast California into western parts of Arizona and the southern tip there of Nevada. That is an excessive heat watch, where temperatures could get well above 100 degrees here coming up in the next several days in the week ahead. Well, looking at Alaska weather, this past week, as much as 2 to 5 inches of rain fell in the upper Kobuk and Noaa river valleys, and as a result, the river system is seeing a rise in creeks as well as the main stem rivers there, so anyone doing any type of recreating or fishing, be careful of that fact. Also, we've seen the Kenai River kind of peak just above minor flood stage this past week, Wednesday into Thursday, just below Ski Lac Lake, and since then the river level there, the Kenai, has been slowly falling over the course of this weekend. But elevated surf will be possible along portions of the west coast Tuesday into Wednesday, as a pretty strong low comes off of eastern Russia with an occluded front pushing into the west sides of the state. New moon occurred yesterday, Saturday, August 27th, and full moon will occur on Saturday, September 10th. And overall, this storm track, or the low pressure system track, is going to run from the eastern bearing down along the west side of the state, across the Alaska Peninsula into far North Pacific, and then swinging back up into the western Gulf. Very similar pattern is what we have seen, which will lead to rather wet conditions at times along areas of the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. Though temperatures should not be drastically cooler anywhere, we do expect temperatures to average above normal, especially along eastern, southeastern portions of the mainland into the Panhandle as we go into early September. Quick check of some of the Federal Aviation Administration webcams this afternoon. Ambler, where the heavier rain fell this past week, partly cloudy, 55 degrees, so giving you guys there a chance to dry out. Shaktoolik, there on the east side of Norton Sound, partly cloudy, 50 degrees, as I mentioned. As that frontal system works its way inland Tuesday into Wednesday, you can see some elevated surf in areas of Norton Sound. And then across east central areas of the mainland along the Alcan border, Yukon Flats, there are some scattered showers that have popped this afternoon, and some of those showers could even have a little graupel, that is little tiny bits of ice, sleet, or small hail as the freezing level has lowered, so that is a possibility. And then in the far southern Panhandle at Minks Island, rain and fog, and expect a steadier batch of moderate to heavy rain this evening into the early overnight. Temperature there this afternoon at 58 degrees. Quick check of the latest advisories, watches, or warnings. There are no advisories, watches, or warnings. I did include the special weather statements just to highlight the fact that we expect river levels and creek levels to stay high there around Ambler in both the Kobuk and Noaa river basins here into early in the week. And then with that stronger frontal system and breezy conditions pushing inland on Tuesday and Wednesday, elevated surf is possible, especially around St. Lawrence Island, the west and south side of the Seward Peninsula, including Nome, and then coming into areas of Norton Sound, including the lower Yukon Delta. Quick check of the Kenai River below Skilac Lake. It crested on Wednesday into early Thursday this past week in just above minor flood stage, and it has since been slowly falling here over the course of the weekend and should continue to do so during the week ahead. And satellite imagery shows the counterclockwise circulation over the Gulf and extending south of Kodiak Island. There are a couple of different low centers, nothing especially strong. And then if you look off toward the left of your screen, back toward Kamchatka in eastern Russia, a lot of brighter enhanced white cloud cover. That is the next weather system that will be eventually affecting the west coast. There is a warm front taking shape out there in the far western Aleutians, far western Bering, and that front will work its way eastward before it occludes. Meanwhile, late tonight into early Monday morning, we have a couple of low centers, one just off the Kenai, eastern Kenai, and another one south of the Gulf. And that system's just going to kind of sit out there, general broad area of low pressure through the Gulf, extending up into the southeast interior along the Alaska Range into northwest Canada. We expect bouts of moderate to, at times, heavier rainfall far southern panhandle this evening and into British Columbia as we go through Monday. Meanwhile, the low that's along the eastern Russian coast will deepen further. It's at 985 millibars Monday afternoon, but by the time we get into Tuesday, we expect that low to deepen to around 975 millibars with a stronger occluded front pushing inland along the west coast. Hence, we expect elevated surf in some of those areas Tuesday into Wednesday. And the Gulf low is rather weak for the time being until the next piece of energy can dive southeastward from the eastern Bering and Bristol Bay area and then swing across the North Pacific and on up into the Gulf. Low temperatures Monday morning will generally be in the 50s across the Panhandle, upper 40s to near 50, much of south central, especially any areas along the Gulf Coast and Cook Inlet. And temperatures Monday afternoon back up into the 60s most areas. Around Anchorage, we could see some sunshine for a change. It's been a rather cloudy period. So any areas that do see some sunshine should get temperatures back up into the 60s. Tuesday morning, lows 50s, warmest there, southern Panhandle, mid-upper 50s. And then areas of the interior could see upper 40s to near 50 with some patchy fog. That could be the case anytime now this year. If you've had some recent rainfall and then you get some clearing at night, this is the time of year for some of that early morning fog. Otherwise, temperatures Tuesday across much of the Panhandle and South Central should be back up at least lower 60s. Across the interior and far north, lows 30s and 40s. Monday afternoon, we'll see a few 60-degree readings, Fairbanks on up toward Yukon Flats, Eagle, Northway, but otherwise generally in the 40s along the Arctic coast and Seward Peninsula. Lows Tuesday morning will generally get down into the mid-upper 30s along the Arctic coast and North Slope, near 40 along the western Seward, and generally in the 40s up through the Yukon Valley. And temperatures Tuesday afternoon will be warmest again. North of the Alaska Range on it through the Tanana Valley, some lower mid-60s, as well as the Yukon Flats. Fort Yukon there, 63, 62 at Eagle. And in the far north, 43 degrees at Utqiagvik, and temperatures near 50 at Nome. And across the southwest Monday morning, as we go up the Yukon and Kuskokwim River basins, low mid-40s for lows. Otherwise, upper 40s to near 50 across the Alaska Peninsula, trailing off into the mid-upper 40s, Dutch Harbor westward through Adak. And Monday afternoon, highs will generally be confined to the 50s through the lower Yukon Basin. Could be up around lower 60s there at Dillingham and King Salmon. And Tuesday morning lows generally in the 40s across the southwest interior, as well as we span out across the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians, with afternoon highs. Tuesday afternoon, bit cooler with that front pushing in with the bands of rain and breezier conditions. Highs generally in the lower mid-50s across the southwestern coast and interior, maybe squeaking out near 60 King Salmon, but otherwise 50s fairly common along the Aleutian chain. Now, the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook for September 3rd through the 7th is calling for a pretty good likelihood of above normal temperatures centered on east central areas of the mainland, including areas of, as we drop down southeastward into the Panhandle. Precipitation Well, we'll get to that in a second. Temperatures 8 to 14 day outlook, September 5th through the 11th. So basically the first couple of weeks of September, temperatures are expected to average a bit above normal here across the east side of the state, especially east central, southeastern portions of the mainland, and extending down into the Panhandle. Not that noticeable simply because there will be cloud cover and precipitation at times. If we had a ridge of high pressure with drier conditions, it would be notably warmer because it would allow the atmosphere still to warm up pretty good for this time of year, but that's not going to be the case. Still dealing with a fair amount of precipitation at times. Precipitation expected to average above normal east central areas and along the Alcan border into the Panhandle September 3rd through the 7th. And we expect that to push back toward the west September 5th through the 11th as the storm track is going to set up across the eastern Bering west side of the state, dropping southeastward across the Alaska Peninsula, then re-emerging into the Gulf and pulling that moisture back north across the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle and all the way up along the Alaska Range into the interior. So occasionally wet here, southern parts of the state.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned Monday or on Tuesday, we're going to continue to see a similar pattern whereby areas of low pressure, the storm track runs from along the Kamchatka Peninsula in eastern Russia, dropping things southeastward across the eastern half of the Bering along the southwest coast and down across the Alaska Peninsula, and then having energy and lows reemerge and pivoting back up into the western Gulf. Monday morning, look for IFR conditions across much of the Panhandle, perhaps a flash of lightning off the northeastern Gulf Coast, widespread IFR along the north slope and along the Arctic coast, and also areas of IFR there in the central Aleutians. Monday afternoon could be an isolated storm pop up there along the Yukon Flats and areas south of the Alaska Range, Talkeetna Mountains. Still pockets of IFR conditions there across inner areas of the Panhandle and northeastern Gulf Coast along the spine of the Brooks Range and there between Utqiagvik and Dead Horse, and then a broad area out over the western central Bering. Tuesday morning could be isolated lightning strikes there along the northern Gulf Coast, much of the Panhandle socked in with IFR. And also IFR, central Yukon Valley on up through the eastern half of the North Slope and Brooks Range to along the central Gulf Coast. Widespread IFR conditions from the Bering Strait down along the YK deltas, including Nunavik Island, St. Matthew, St. Paul, on up toward St. Lawrence. And for Tuesday afternoon, still IFR conditions there along the north central, northeastern Gulf Coast into the northern part of the Panhandle, with IFR conditions anticipated there along the lower Chukchi Sea, Kotzebue Sound down through Norton Sound, and into Bristol Bay and along the central Alaska Peninsula. Also keep in mind this time of year, even though the forecast might show MVFR or VFR conditions with the fog potential at nighttime, if there's any residual low-level moisture, very easy to form IFR conditions with locally dense fog and lower cloud cover. Anaktuvik Pass, IFR conditions becoming MVFR. Same thing, Adigan Pass, IFR in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. Further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill should generally see MVFR conditions on Monday. Rainy Pass, IFR, but becoming MVFR, and there could be some cumulus buildups, isolated thunder popping there east of the east entrance Monday afternoon. Windy Pass, MVFR expected throughout the day. South of there, though, an isolated storm could pop up across the Talkeetna Mountains with some of those cumulus buildups. Isabel Pass, generally MVFR conditions for Monday. Mentasta Pass, look for VFR conditions, though as you fly south of the south entrance, you'll encounter MVFR conditions. Further south and west of there, MVFR will prevail around Tanita Pass. And right now it's looking like at least Portage may be able to hold out on VFR conditions there during the day Monday. But the northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White there will be socked in with IFR throughout the day Monday. Freezing levels are lowest there along the northwest coast to the Bering Strait down. Freezing levels aloft around 4,000 or below 4,000 feet. They bump up to above 6,000 to 7,000 feet along the Alcan border, southern parts of the mainland, rising to 8,000 and 10,000 feet over the Panhandle. And then back to the west, look for push of warmer air riding up there along the western Aleutians. Freezing levels above 12,000 and 14,000 feet from the central and western Aleutian islands. Greatest threat for icing will be areas of the British Columbia coast into pockets there of the Panhandle to the northeastern Gulf Coast, generally above 8,000 and 10,000 feet. And then further west, as that push of warmer air comes in off the western Bering, approaching St. Lawrence and eastern Russia above 12,000 feet, associated with a warm front. Finally, jet stream winds aloft 30,000 feet, jet core upwards of 120, 125 knots from the southwest, coming in across the Panhandle into British Columbia. On the backside, we have strong jet core of 120 knots from the north, cutting across the west side of the state, the mainland, cutting across the central Alaska Peninsula, upwards to 135 knot northeasterly winds, bringing it down to 700 millibars or 9,000 feet. Low pressure circulation remains there in the Gulf. We have 40 to 50 knot winds coming on shore from the southwest through the lower Panhandle and into Haida Gwaii and around British Columbia. And then back to the west, broad area 40 to 60 knot winds across the central western Bering. And at 3,000 feet, low pressure circulation still remains there over the southwestern Gulf, with a broad area 40 to 55 knot winds out over the central and western Aleutians. This translates to surface to 3,000 foot turbulence there, the western Aleutians into the eastern Aleutians, and then along the northern Gulf Coast, surface to 4,000 feet, and a small pocket of surface to 5,000 foot turbulence there in the central Panhandle.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from Gina and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by EPSCoR to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and Gina's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that they could that would be easier to travel with, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state.
Which you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy. And it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. Computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math, in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine weather segment of the show. And before we get into that, let's look at the sea ice edge. Not much change. We have a little bit of ice there on the north central Alaskan Arctic coast. Otherwise, the bulk of any shoreline ice is there still along the Russian coast. But as we expect, it's just going to continue to be a slow melt-off here over the next 2-3 weeks. But thereafter, later in September and early October, we expect some of the first ice of the season to develop. Across the southeast panhandle, Monday's marine forecast, southeast to south winds 20 to 25 knots. Waves generally 4 feet through the inner channels, though it could be up around 6 feet there at Dixon Entrance. The outer coast, look for south to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. Waves 6 to as high as 8 feet, especially Yakutat westward. For Tuesday, winds will continue out of the southeast to south for the inner channels, as high as 25 knots there down toward Dixon Entrance with waves of 6 to 7 feet. Otherwise, the interior channels, 3 to 4 foot waves, and the outer coast, look for winds generally out of the south-southeast around 15 knots and waves 6 to 7 feet. Across the northwestern Gulf Coast and Cook Inlet, winds will be variable. Middle Cook Inlet 10 knots, waves a couple of feet, as well as variable winds 10 knots at Prince William Sound, waves a couple of feet there. And the entrance of Cook Inlet, northwest winds 20 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. On Tuesday, variable winds continue in Prince William Sound with waves a couple of feet. Winds will generally be out of the south-southeast 15 knots through Cook Inlet with waves of 4 to 5 feet. And off the Kenai, winds will generally be out of the northeast around 10 knots and waves 3 to 4 feet. For Monday, Kodiak Island will have west-northwest winds 15 knots, waves 3 to 5 feet. And then along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, waves 6 to 7 feet on the North Pacific side, and 6 to 8 feet once you get away from the protective areas there at Bristol Bay on out to north of Cold Bay. On Tuesday, winds across the region will generally be out of the west-southwest, 20 to 25 knots along the length of the Alaska Peninsula, waves 5 feet on the North Pacific side and 5 to 8 feet on the Bering side. Winds will tend to be a bit more southwest to variable, 10 knots around Kodiak Island with waves of 3 to 4 feet. Monday, the eastern Aleutians will see north-northwesterly winds around 20 knots, a little higher, 30 knots south of Dutch Harbor. Waves running 5 to 7 feet on the Bering side, and also 5 to 7 feet on the North Pacific side. And then on Tuesday, widespread winds across the region out of the southwest around 25 knots, waves 6 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side and 8 to 9 feet on the Bering side. And looking along the southwest coast, winds northwesterly 15 to 20 knots there between Nunavik Island and the mainland. Northerly through Norton Sound, 15 knots, waves 4 feet. And look for winds out of the south as that approaching warm front that's going to be occluding approaches St. Matthew with waves of 7 to 8 feet there. And then as that occluded front works its way inland along the southwest coast, look for southeast winds to shift to the southwest and increase to 25 to 30 knots across much of the region, with waves building generally 6 to 8 feet, though they could be as high as around 10 to 13 feet, especially in the vicinity of St. Matthew. And along the Arctic coast, winds will be out of the east 10 to 15 knots on Monday with waves 2 to 3 feet. Winds will turn to the northwest 10 to 15 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea and to Kotzebue Sound with waves of 3 to 4 feet, and then expect winds southerly there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island at 15 knots and waves 5 feet. On Tuesday, easterly winds continue along the Arctic coast at 5 to 15 knots, waves 3 feet. Winds pick up, though, through the lower Chukchi Sea out of the southeast ahead of that occluded front. Out of Kotzebue Sound and lower Chukchi Sea, 30-knot winds with 6-foot waves, and those winds will shift to the southwest on the other side of that front to 30 knots there south of the Bering Strait and north of St. Lawrence Island with waves of 6 to 8 feet. Quick check of the surface weather map Monday afternoon shows the warm front crossing the central Bering that will eventually occlude. The low of 985 will deepen down to around 975 millibars. And just a broad area of low pressure continues from the Gulf up into the southeast mainland and northwest Canada. On Tuesday, the occluded front works its way inland with a band of rain and some gusty winds, as I mentioned, as high as 25-30 knots along the southwest and west central mainland coast as the low deepens to 975 millibars. Weak low pressure still remains in the central Gulf and weak low across northwest Canada. Otherwise, we expect this pattern, the front, to push inland and weaken with that energy diving southeastward along the west side of the state. That's it for the show tonight. Thank you for joining me, and I'll be back again tomorrow night.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.